A low whine came off the linoleum before it came off the dog, an unbroken thread of sound with no bark in it, no growl, just grief given a pitch. It rose from a 9-year-old Belgian Malinois lying flat against a pair of scuffed brown boots in the lobby of the Sowell Regional Working Dog Center, and it did not stop when the boot's owner shifted his weight. And it did not stop when a captain in pressed camis crouched down and said, not unkindly, but not gently either, "Sir, I'm sorry, but visitors aren't permitted to touch program animals." The dog will not leave the old man's feet, and no one in the building can explain why a working canine with no shared history behaves as if he already knows him. He is 79 years old. The Marine Corps' own database lists him as dead, and has for 10 years. In 48 hours, this dog boards a transport van bound for a rehoming agency 2 states away. And whatever is happening on this floor right now at 11 in the morning on a Wednesday in October is the only thing standing in the way of it. If you've ever been written off by a system that never bothered to check its own paperwork, type steady in the comments. Captain Meredith Ashcroft had a tablet under one arm and 12 years of training theory behind her voice, and she used both like tools she trusted completely. The way a person trusts a level or a torque wrench, something calibrated, something that could not be argued with because it had already done the arguing for her. She looked at the readout scrolling across the screen, heart rate elevated, cortisol markers inferred from posture, a bonding risk flag blinking amber. And she looked at the old man in the doorway. And for a moment, the 2 pieces of information sat in her head, refusing to reconcile, the way 2 puzzle edges look like they should fit and do not. "Sergeant Red," she said, not turning around, "get the leash." Sergeant Colton Red did not move as fast as she expected. He was 26, 4 years into handling, and something in him had gone quiet and watchful the moment the dog folded itself over those boots like it had done every day of its life. The whine kept on, low, steady, patient in the way that only true fear is patient. Bracken's ribs moved fast and shallow. His eyes never left the old man's hands. The old man himself had said almost nothing. He stood with a coffee tin's worth of stillness in him already, though nobody in that lobby yet knew about the tin, or what waited folded inside it. Brass gone the color of a creek bottom, older than the dog by decades, and older than the building by more than that. Alton Pruitt had come, by his own account, only to see about a dog he'd read of in a county paper. He had not expected the dog to see about him first. Alton Pruitt wore a barn coat the color of dried tobacco, olive drab gone soft and pale at the seams, and under it a flannel shirt worn thin enough at the collar that the light came through it when he turned his head toward the window. His cap was the kind sold at feed stores for a few dollars and worn for 20 years past its usefulness. The brim bleached the color of a summer field, the stitching over the bill gone loose enough to show thread. He did not look like a man anyone in that lobby expected to matter. That was, in its way, the entire and unremarked genius of him. 60 years of practice at being the least interesting object in any room he entered. A discipline so total it had become indistinguishable from his actual bones. His grandson Wyatt sat beside him on the vinyl bench, 10 years old, sneakers not quite touching the floor, working a loose thread on his shoelace between 2 fingers, with the patient inattention of a boy who has learned that grown men's business takes longer than a boy would like, and there is no use hurrying it. He had come along because his mother worked Wednesdays, and Alton had said, easy as anything, that a dog center was as good a place as any for a boy to spend an afternoon, though the truth sat closer to the bone than that. Alton had read 3 lines in the paper about a retiring detection dog going unclaimed, and had felt something in his chest tilt sideways, like a shelf giving way, and had not been able to say why. and had come anyway.
His right hand, resting on his knee, carried a tremor that had been with him 11 years now, fine and constant, the kind that made his coffee cup ring faintly against its saucer of a morning. It was not the hand of a young man. It had known frostbite once, briefly, on a hillside whose name he had not spoken aloud since 1971. And it had known 55 years of fence wire and tractor bolts, and the particular grip of a splitting maul. And all of that lived in the visible architecture of it, the swollen first knuckle, the pale seam of an old scar along the thumb. But when Bracken's whine first reached him from across the lobby, before the dog had even lifted its head, that hand did something it had not done in longer than Alton could easily reckon. The tremor stilled. The fingers curled, unbidden, into a shape. Not a fist, something more particular than a fist. 4 fingers folded, and the thumb laid flat along the first knuckle, and hung there a moment, in the air, like a word forming in a man's mouth before he decides whether to say it. He looked down at his own hand, as if it belonged to someone he used to know. Before he set it back on his knee, he reached, with the same hand, into the left pocket of the barn coat and drew out a small tin that had once held coffee and now held a single object wrapped in a handkerchief gone soft as cloth can go from decades of folding. He did not open it. He only pressed his thumb once against the shape of it through the cloth, the way another man might touch a coin in his pocket for luck, or a woman might touch a ring she no longer wore on her hand. Wyatt watched him do it and said nothing, because he had seen his grandfather do this before, at the kitchen table, at church, once at the foot of Ruth's grave, with the cemetery grass still green from spring rain, and had learned that some things a boy does not ask about. He only notices, and carries the noticing until noticing becomes its own kind of understanding. It was in that exact half-second, tin returned to pocket, hand gone still again on his knee, that Bracken's head came up across the lobby, ears forward, body already rising before his handler had said a word, and crossed 30 feet of tile floor as though someone had called his name. Nobody had. Captain Ashcroft's hand was still extended toward the leash clip when the 90-pound dog folded itself down at Alton Pruitt's boots and refused, with his whole body, to consider getting up again. "All right," Ashcroft said, and there was a laugh underneath the word, not cruel exactly, the kind of laugh a person uses to reset a room that is tilted somewhere she didn't authorize. "Sergeant Red, let's get Bracken back to Kennel 4. Sir, I do apologize. Sometimes they attach to novelty. New smell, new coat." She said it the way she might read a diagnosis off a chart, and in fairness to her, she had read 100 charts that agreed with her. Dogs drawn to unfamiliar scent, unfamiliar posture. Nothing here that her training hadn't accounted for a dozen times before. Red crouched and reached for the leash clip at Bracken's collar. The dog did not growl. He simply became, in that instant, 110 pounds of dead, immovable weight, flattened along the floor with his chin resting on the toe of Alton's boot. Eyes rolled up to watch the old man's face the way a man watches a door he is afraid will close. "Sir." Ashcroft crouched too now, tablet angled so the amber flag caught the light. "I need to ask you not to encourage the behavior, and I'll need to see some identification, just for our visitor log." Alton reached, slow with the particular slowness of a man whose hands take a beat longer than they used to, and drew out a veteran's ID card gone soft at the corners, the plastic laminate lifting at one edge like a scab that would not quite heal. He held it out without a word. The private at the front counter, a girl no older than 20, named on her name tape as PFC Whitcomb, ran it through the visitor system out of habit more than need, and the small screen returned its answer in the flat, indifferent font of a database that has never once doubted itself. Pruitt, Alton R. Status, deceased. Record date, 2013. The junior handlers by the water cooler heard it before Ashcroft did, and one of them, A corporal, not long out of the schoolhouse, laughed outright, a short bark of disbelief.
"Sir, you want to explain that to us?"
Alton did not look at him. He looked at the dog. "Sir," Ashcroft said again, gentler now, the way a person gentles their voice around someone they've decided is confused. "There's clearly some kind of mix-up in the system. That happens, believe me. But I am going to need Sergeant Red to move the dog, and I am going to need you to step back from the kennel area." She held up the tablet as though it were a second, more reasonable version of herself. "Bracken has been flagged bonding avoidant for 6 weeks. 0 successful placements. This isn't a training call. This is data." Alton's mouth made the shape of a word and did not finish it. What he said, when he finally spoke, took 11 words and no more. "He's not avoiding a bond. He already made one." Nobody in the lobby understood what that meant. Bracken, lying with his whole weight against a stranger's boot, seemed to be the only one in the room who did. The laughter did not last. It rarely does, once a thing has had time to sit. By 1 o'clock, the lobby had mostly emptied. Visitors filtered elsewhere. And Alton had been permitted, on Sergeant Red's own quiet authority, and against no small amount of Ashcroft's better judgment, to sit on a bench just inside the kennel wing, while paperwork on the deceased record error worked its way towards somebody with the rank to fix it. Bracken lay beside him the entire time, chin on boot, ribs slowing by degrees, the way a held breath finally lets go. Red watched more than he worked. He had handled 6 dogs in 4 years and had learned, the way any good handler learns, that a dog's body tells the truth a half-second before its behavior confirms it. He noticed that Bracken's ears, which had not stopped swiveling all morning, tracking every door, every raised voice, every cartwheel down the corridor, had gone loose and still, angled forward only toward the old man's chest. He noticed that when Alton breathed out slow, Bracken's own breathing slowed to match it. 4 counts in, 6 counts out, like a second heart learning the rhythm of a first one. "He's reading your breathing," Red said, half to himself. "Dogs generally do," Alton said. "Good ones, the ones that were taught right, a long time back, before it got scientific." Ashcroft came through twice in that stretch of hours, tablet in hand both times. And both times, she stood at the mouth of the corridor and ran her numbers again, as if a third pass might return a different sum. Bracken's baseline heart rate, elevated for 6 weeks running, had dropped to what her own intake sheet called, in cold clinical print, within normal limits for a resting adult male of the breed. She had tried recall commands twice that hour. Standard verbal, standard hand signal, the ones every dog in the program answered to on the first call. Bracken had lifted his head at her voice both times and set it back down, unhurried, uninterested, the way a man might glance at a phone ringing with a number he does not recognize. "That's not in the literature," she said, mostly to herself, the third time it happened. "No," Alton agreed. He was looking at the dog's feet, not her face. Some of it never got written down. She looked at him a beat longer than professionalism required. There was a physicality to him she found she could not stop noticing, now that she had let herself notice it once. The way he did not fidget, the way his stillness read less like an old man's stiffness, and more like a discipline held for so long it had worn a groove into him. The way his gaze moved across a room in slow, complete arcs, instead of the darting half-glances most nervous visitors gave a strange building. She had spent 4 years building a science out of reading dogs' bodies. It occurred to her, standing in that corridor at 2 in the afternoon, that she had not yet properly read the man's. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "I want to be fair to you. Your ID says one thing and our system says another. And until legal sorts that out, I have a dog scheduled for transport in less than 48 hours, who has failed every placement assessment we've run this quarter. And now he's parked at the feet of a man who, by our own records, doesn't exist. I don't have a box on my tablet for that. No, Alton said again, and something almost like sympathy moved behind his eyes. I don't imagine you do. Red, crouched a few feet off with a bowl of water Bracken had not touched, spoke without looking up. Ma'am, his pulse dropped 40 beats in under a minute when he found him. I've never seen that happen with anybody in this building. Not with me, not with you, not even with Colonel Sowell, and Bracken likes the Colonel fine. Ashcroft did not answer that right away. She looked instead at the amber flag on her screen, which had in the last hour, without her having touched a single setting, gone quietly green. By 4 o'clock, with the light through the high windows turning the color of weak tea, Alton rose from the bench with the slow, deliberate economy of a man who has learned exactly how much motion a joint will forgive him. And Bracken rose with him, matching his rhythm as though they had rehearsed it. The corporal from that morning had drifted back to the doorway to watch, arms crossed, no longer laughing. Alton lifted his right hand. It did not tremble now. He shaped it slow, 4 fingers folded, thumb along the first knuckle, held at the height of his own collarbone, and let it hang there a half-second longer than a gesture needs. The way a man holds a note he isn't sure the room remembers the tune to. Then he brought 2 fingers to his lips and gave a whistle so low it barely carried past the first row of kennels. 3 short notes and a 4th held long, a pattern with no name in any training manual printed since 1975. Bracken's whole body changed before the whistle had finished. He came up onto all 4s, squared his shoulders to Alton's chest, and sat. Not the loose, distracted sit of a dog obeying a command it half remembers, but a sit with weight in it, spine straight, eyes locked. The stillness of an animal that has, after 6 weeks of grief, finally been told the thing it was waiting to hear. Red's water bowl hit the floor and did not spill, because his hand had gone motionless around it. Colonel Emmett Soule had come down the corridor at a normal pace, summoned by Red's call 20 minutes earlier over a matter he'd expected to be routine. A database error, a difficult visitor, the kind of thing that crossed his desk twice a month and rarely needed his own boots on the floor. He was 61, built lean the way career officers who never stop running tend to stay lean, and he came around the corner into the kennel wing, already forming the sentence he meant to say to smooth the whole matter over. He never said it. He stopped mid-stride, one boot still lifted an inch off the tile. At the sight of an old man's hand dropping from beside his collarbone and a 9-year working dog sitting square and steady before him, like a private called to attention by a general he'd thought long buried. That signal, Soule said, and his voice had gone thin in a way none of the junior handlers had heard from him before. I've seen that signal. It's in the orientation module, slide 11. We show it every quarter. He looked at Alton the way a man looks at a photograph that has stepped impossibly out of its frame. We tell new handlers it's a legacy technique, origin unknown. It's not unknown, Alton said. It's mine. The colonel did not answer right away. He looked instead at Bracken, sitting motionless, and at the whistle still hanging almost visible in the quiet of the corridor, and at the amber-turned green flag on a captain's tablet held slack at her side, and understood before anyone explained a single fact to him that the story this building had been telling itself for 10 years was wrong in some fundamental way he had not yet found the shape of. Colonel Soule asked for the visitor log twice, as though the second reading might contradict the first. And it did not. Prout, Alton R. Status, deceased. Record date, 2013. He set the tablet down on the counter with the particular care of a man setting down something he suspects is about to become evidence. Sir, he said to Alton, and the word came out formal in a way it had not been 10 minutes earlier. Were you Marine Corps? Dog handler program, mid to late 60s? 19 to 25, Alton said. 1965 to 71. 3 dogs in that stretch. Last one was named for a fence line, if that means anything to you. It meant something.
Soul's jaw worked once before he spoke again. There's a Pruitt in the Fallen Handler archive. Died in a training accident. Camp Pendleton, 2013, according to the record. Different first initial buried in the file if you dig, but nobody ever dug because nobody had reason to doubt a death certificate with a name that matched close enough. He looked at Alton the way a man looks at a bill he thought had already been paid. You've been listed among our dead for a decade, Mr. Pruitt. There's a plaque with a version of your name on it in the front hall of this building. Something moved behind Alton's eyes, brief as a held breath let go, and then it was gone again, folded back down into the same stillness he'd worn all morning. I've been listed among the living just fine at my own kitchen table, he said. Didn't much need the Marine Corps' permission for that. It was Ashcroft who asked the practical question, because someone in that hallway had to, and her voice had lost, in the space of an afternoon, the crisp certainty it had opened with. Sir, with respect, if this is a clerical error, it's one we can fix. But Bracken's transfer authorization is already signed. I signed it myself 3 days ago, before any of this. Transport leaves Friday at 0900. Once he's on that van and off our books, reclassification isn't a form. It's a legal process with another agency, and I do not have the authority to reverse a signed transfer without the base commander's countersignature. And he is traveling until Thursday night. Then we have a day, Sowell said.
We have less than that if the paperwork side doesn't move, Ashcroft said.
And, sir, I want to be square with you. To correct 10 years of a false death record, JAG is going to want the original service file, not a database entry. Ours shows the physical record was transferred to a civilian archiving contractor in 2013 for digitization. That contractor's warehouse had a fire in 2014. Everything not yet scanned was declared a loss. She said it plainly, without relish, a woman reporting a fact she wished were not true. If your original file was in that batch, Mr. Pruitt, there may be nothing left to correct it with. Just a database that says you're dead, and a man standing in my hallway who very much is not. The hallway went quiet enough to hear the kennel fans humming 3 rooms off. Bracken, still sitting square at Alton's knee, leaned the slightest degree of weight against his leg, as if he had heard the shape of the trouble in the humans' voices and meant to answer it the only way he could. Alton looked down at the dog, and for the first time all day, something like weariness crossed his face. Not defeat, just the plain tiredness of a man who has spent a decade not fighting a thing he now finds he must fight in 48 hours. Then I suppose, he said quietly, we'd best find out if that fire told the truth. Ashcroft did not sleep well that night, and she would not have called what she felt guilt, not yet. Only an itch she could not place. The sense of a fact sitting just under the surface of her memory, like a splinter worked in too deep to see. It was near midnight when it surfaced. She sat up in the dark of her quarters and thought of Slide 11, the orientation module every incoming handler sat through in their first week. The one with the grainy black and white photograph captioned, "Legacy Bonding Technique, Handler Unidentified." And she thought of a young man's face in that photograph, lean-jawed, dark-haired, a whistle raised halfway to his lips, and she thought of Alton Pruitt's eyes that afternoon, and she was at her desk with the module file open before she'd finished the thought. The photograph matched, not resembled, matched, down to a small scar along the left thumb, the same one she'd noticed that morning without knowing what it was. For 10 years, the center had used his unclaimed face to teach new handlers not to trust civilian claims of forgotten history. She sat with that a long while before she closed the laptop. The archive request went through official channels the next morning and returned, within the hour, the same answer Ashcroft had already braced for. Original physical file, Alton R. Pruitt,
transferred 2013 to Redfield Record Solutions for digitization. Redfield's Millbrook warehouse suffered a structural fire in March 2014. Digitization records incomplete. Physical loss presumed total. It was Grady Millwood, 74 years old, the center's own civilian records custodian for the last 11 years, and a man most of the junior staff regarded as a fixture of the building, rather than a person with a history of his own, who read the report over Ashcroft's shoulder in the archive room and went very still. "Redfield didn't lose everything in that fire," he said. Ashcroft turned. "Mr. Millwood, the report's specific. The report's wrong. Or it's right about the fire and wrong about what burned." He pulled a chair out slow, the way a man sits down when he has decided, after a long time standing, to finally say a thing he has carried. "I worked records intake here starting in 1971, before I was ever civilian staff, back when I was a young private with more boxes on my desk than hours in a week. There was a batch that year flagged for reprocessing, damaged folders, water stain on the corners, nothing wrong with what was inside them. Reprocessing had a fee attached even then. My supervisor told me to box what looked salvageable and ship the rest for digitizing later, when budget allowed. Later never came. The boxes went to a supply annex behind Building 6, and nobody ever indexed them, because indexing them meant admitting they existed, and admitting they existed meant explaining why they'd sat there for years already. Ashcroft felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the archive room's air conditioning. "You're telling me there's a physical box in this facility that was never sent to Redfield at all? I'm telling you, I put a folder with the name Pruitt on it in one of those boxes myself in October of 1971, when I was 20 years old and it was the end of a 60-hour week, and I could not tell one water-stained P name from another anymore." His voice had gone thin, an old man's voice, reaching back across 54 years to a version of himself he had never forgiven. "I've thought about that folder more times than I could count. I never knew it belonged to a man who'd end up standing in this hallway. I thought I'd misfiled a stranger. I didn't know I'd buried somebody's whole life." Nobody in the archive room said anything for a long moment. Then Ashcroft picked up her radio. "We need Building 6 unlocked," she said. "Now, before Friday runs out." The supply annex behind Building 6 smelled of dust and cold concrete and the particular staleness of a room the sun had not properly reached in years. And it took Sergeant Red and 2 junior handlers the better part of an hour, working by flashlight and Grady Millwood's uncertain memory, to find the box marked in faded grease pencil with a batch number that matched nothing in any current system. Inside, beneath a dozen other water-stained folders, lay one bearing the name Pruitt A, its edges soft with age, but its ink still legible, a full service record, complete with separation papers, commendations for canine detection work across 3 deployments, and a photograph clipped to the inside cover of a lean young man with dark hair and a whistle half raised to his lips. Colonel Soule held that photograph beside Alton's face for a long moment in the fluorescent light of the archive room, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing left to argue. By Thursday evening, the correction moved through channels with a speed Ashcroft had never seen paperwork move before. JAG notified, the base commander reached by phone a full day ahead of his return. A counter-signature secured over a secure line before midnight. Bracken's transfer authorization was rescinded at 11:40 that night, 9 hours before the van would have left the lot. Ashcroft walked the corrected file to the base commander's desk herself the following morning, in person, though a courier would have done, because she found she wanted to be the one to carry it. Alton, when the news reached him, took it the way he seemed to take most things, with a stillness that gave away almost nothing, and a single sentence that gave away everything that mattered. "Their names should be the ones fixed first," he said, when Soule offered a formal ceremony to correct the plaque in the front hall. Mine can wait its turn. I'd only ask you let the dog stay." That evening, with the correction filed and Bracken curled at last into a real sleep on the floor beside the bench, rather than the thin, watchful half-rest of the past 6 weeks, Alton sat with Wyatt in the quiet of the visitor lounge and took the coffee tin from his coat pocket for the second time that week, and this time he opened it. Inside, wrapped in its softened handkerchief, lay a leash clasp of tarnished brass, folded flat, worn smooth along one edge where a thumb had rubbed it 1,000 times over.
"Grandpa," Wyatt said, "whose was that? Before the war even. It's older than your dog's." "It was your great-great-grandfather's," Alton said. "Ruth's daddy. He ran a shepherd on this very kind of duty, coast watch, back before either of us were born. And when he died, the dog wouldn't eat for near a month, same as this one here. Ruth kept the clasp after her daddy passed, gave it to me the week we married, told me a leash only works if both ends trust each other, and asked me to promise I'd keep it till I found the right animal to put it on." He turned it slow between 2 fingers, brass catching what little light the lounge had left in it. "I've carried it 40 years and never found him. Didn't know I was still looking till I read 3 lines in a county paper about a dog nobody wanted." He began, very low, almost under his breath, to hum a few bars of a hymn Wyatt half recognized from Sunday mornings, the same 3 notes his grandmother used to hum over the sink while she dried the good plates. And Alton hummed it now, the way he must have heard her hum it 1,000 times while she polished this same piece of brass at their kitchen table, decades before either dog or dementia or database had touched either of their lives. He's not grieving a handler, and hasn't been all week. He's grieving the only voice that ever called him by his working name, and has been doing it quietly, without complaint, for 4 long years. "Some debts get filed away," he said finally, folding the handkerchief back over the clasp, "and just take their time finding their way home." 3 weeks later, on a bright, cold morning in November, the front hall of the Seoul Regional Working Dog Center held a small ceremony that made no headlines and needed none. Colonel Seoul himself removed the old brass plate bearing a misfiled name and set in its place a corrected one. Alton R. Prout Handler, 1965 to 1971. Living, a word that had never before appeared on that wall, and drew from the assembled staff no applause, only a long and respectful quiet. The kind a room gives when it understands it has been wrong about something for a very long time. The orientation module was pulled from rotation that same week. Captain Ashcroft rewrote Slide 11 herself, working 3 evenings past her shift to get the wording right. And when the new version went up, it no longer read "Handler Unidentified" beneath the old photograph. It read a full paragraph, his name, his years, his method, and beneath that, in smaller print, she insisted on adding herself. A note that the center's own institutional memory had once used this man's uncredited face to teach new handlers doubt, and that it would not make that mistake again. She showed the new slide to Grady Millwood before she showed it to anyone else, and the old archivist read it twice and said only, "That's kinder than I deserve." And Ashcroft told him it wasn't kindness, it was accuracy, which was the thing her whole career had taught her to value, and the thing this whole building had somehow forgotten to apply to a living man. Bracken came home with Alton and Wyatt the following Saturday, in the bed of a truck older than Ashcroft herself, riding with his head out the window the entire 40 minutes, ears back, tongue loose, a dog no longer waiting for anything. He took to the farm the way a creature takes to ground it somehow already remembers, sleeping most nights at the foot of Alton's bed, and the rest of his hours trailing Wyatt across the yard at a patient, unhurried heel that no tablet had ever taught him,
and none ever could.
Alton still rose before light most mornings, out of 80 years of habit more than need, and still sat some evenings at the workbench with the coffee tin open before him, though the clasp no longer lived inside it. It rode now on Bracken's collar, looped through the ring where a tag might have hung, brass gone warm rather than cold from being worn instead of stored. That evening, on the porch, with the last of the light going the color of a healed bruise over the western fence line, Alton sat in the chair that had been Ruth's before it was his, and Bracken lay stretched along the boards at his feet with the old clasp catching the porch light every time he breathed. Wyatt had fallen asleep an hour before, sunk sideways against the dog's flank, with one hand still loosely curled in his fur, the way boys sleep when they have finally stopped waiting for something to be taken from them. Inside, on the stove, the kettle had just begun its first low note. Not yet a whistle, only the sound a thing makes in the instant before it remembers how to sing.